All right, tonight we're right back where we started from the last time. That is that we were talking about Jesus leaving Galilee, and he has gone over on the east side of the Jordan River, down in the area of Jericho, and from this place then he will go back and forth up into the city of Jerusalem. Now this is a picture of a valley down there where Jericho is, but as we pointed out, let's study some other things now that happened before he entered into Jerusalem. If we go straight into Matthew 21, we're going to be going into the time when he goes down and goes into Jerusalem, and then the big controversy starts. And as you study with Matthew, then without bringing these other things in, it appears that he goes down there, and then just all of a sudden, why, everybody is on him. But that's not the way it happened. Things happened before this. There are other incidents that took place that the book of Matthew doesn't tell us about, that John does tell us about. So John sets the stage for his entrance into Jerusalem then. Now Jesus went to Jerusalem at the Feast of the Dedication we studied last week, and there people gathered around and wondering about what he was going to do. Then he went to Mount Olivet, or Mount Olives, and there is where he raised Lazarus up on top of there. Now that's where we got through this last week of him raising Lazarus there. He had already raised one other young man, but that's back at the beginning of his ministry. This now is down at the end. This is the kind of country that he would have been passing through, the wilderness down through Jericho. This is a road that he would be traveling up as it goes 18 miles from Jericho up to Mount Olives and Jerusalem. There is a picture of Mount Olives. That's where he's going to be going, and we're going to be reading about his stories now as he's up on top of that hill. That's another picture of it. It's not a very high hill. I think it's about 200 feet higher than the temple ground, and that's where this picture is taken, from the temple ground that's up there. But there's a little town up there called Bethany. And that is where Jesus is going, and that's where Mary, Martha, and Lazarus lived, was up on top of this mountain here that was called Mount Olives. Now, his entry from Mount Olives into Jerusalem there is going to take place, but what we're talking about, what were the conditions he was walking into? When he went into Jerusalem, what was the fervor? What was the talk of the town? What was the climate of society? We need to find out some things about what was going on there in Jerusalem, how they felt about him, before he walks down, for us to see why they do certain things. So that then is where we read then in Matthew chapter 21 and in verse 1. Now tonight we're going to continue from the study of John, to get the background for his entry. So everybody turn back to John the 11th chapter, and that's where we'll be going then tonight. So as we go back there, in fact you can turn that off. That's all I'm going to be using that for tonight. Okay, now as we go back, he has raised Lazarus from the dead. Now this is going to cause some commotion, and it will have an effect on the way they treat him when he goes into Jerusalem. So as we turn over here, let's start reading down in verse 45. Many therefore of the Jews who came to Martha and beheld what he did, believed on him. But some of them that went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus had done. And the chief priests therefore and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, What do we do? For this man doth many signs. So now then, there's so many people that has witnessed this that they can no longer ignore it. They can no longer just throw it off and say that nothing happened. Jesus has waited for 4 days until the body was actually stinking. Everybody up there had been wailing and moaning and watching the grave, and they knew how long it had been. When Jesus came up and yelled into that grave, he just made his appearance, yelled in, and Lazarus came forth. So they can't deny it. That is the problem. But this shows the condition of their heart. And it's important for us to see this, to understand how they can treat Jesus the way they treated him. So if somebody has such a hard heart that if Jesus raised this individual from the dead, and they actually admitted that he was raised from the dead, But they said, now what are we going to do because he's doing all these miracles? They've got a real hard heart. And so you can expect them to do anything. So don't get shocked when we go down there and when they make plans how are we going to put him to death, because they're already starting to make these plans. Now, an interesting thing is, it said, if we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So if we don't do something with this guy, he's going to cause such a commotion that the Romans will come down and take away our freedom in Jerusalem. Now, the reason they were concerned about that is this, that Jerusalem was controlled by the Romans. But the Romans had made a deal with Jerusalem. Since it was what was called a temple city, it was the center of a major religion, the Jewish religion. The Romans said, we will let you take care of your own police force. We'll let you take care of the peace in that city. But if you don't take care of it, we'll move our army in and we'll remove it from you. So they then can see that many of these Jews are going to start believing in Jesus. The city's going to go in an uproar. And they said, we're going to lose our freedom because the Romans will come. And in verse 49, but a certain one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year. Now, in some of the other Gospels, you will read Annas was high priest that year. And you're going to see both of them were high priest when they put Jesus to death. And the high priest had to make certain decisions. Now, the situation on this is that they both held that office. By this time in the Jewish religion, the high priesthood was being bought and sold. That a guy would come in and he would place the highest bid, and then he would get to be the high priest. And so the Romans have set up Caiaphas. Now, Annas was the normal high priest. According to the law of Moses, you take it coming down out of one generation to another generation, and out of these generations of Zadok, why, that's the man who should be high priest. But at this time, the Roman says, we're putting Caiaphas in. And so they put him in. Now, the Jews do not recognize Caiaphas, not as the legitimate high priest. But Caiaphas here, he's the, shall we say, he's the political boss. And so what he says then is, he said, you know nothing at all. In other words, you're talking about killing him. You don't know anything at all. Nor do you take account that it is expedient for you that one man should die for the people, and not the whole nation should perish. This is the same way as saying, I don't understand how you people can be so stupid. Don't you understand what needs to be done? Shall we let the whole nation perish, or shall we kill this one guy? Because it's either we kill him or a whole nation perishes. There's your two options. And said, so you don't know what you're talking about. Now, in verse 51, John goes ahead and he adds this, and he says, now this he said, not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but that he might also gather together unto one the children of God that are scattered. So from that day forth they took counsel that they might put him to death. Now, Caiaphas, the high priest, has said, you don't know anything. It's either we kill this man or our nation is destroyed. So they started that day to set up to kill him. And the interesting thing is, he says, it is expedient that one man should perish and not the whole nation. Now, John said that in reality, God had him to say that. This is interesting because he's a wicked man, but he is the high priest of the Jewish religion. God had him to say it in order to show that Jesus would die for the nation. In other words, what John is saying is that Caiaphas never intended to say this at all, but what he said was actually the truth, that one man did die for the nation. What Caiaphas was wanting to say was, it's expedient for us to kill this one man and save our nation from the Romans. But he says, what he actually said was this other thing. Now, the scene is set to start to find an occasion how they might put him to death. We want to kill him. Jesus therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but departed thence into the country near to the wilderness. Now that wilderness is that barren desert that I showed you a little while ago in the pictures there. So he goes out into a city called Ephraim. And there he tarried with the disciples. So Jesus gets out of Jerusalem, gets away from these people, and goes out in the desert by himself so they can't kill him at this time. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. How many Jews were supposed to go to Jerusalem on the day of the Passover? All right, every male Jew, 12 years old and upward, had to go to the Passover in Jerusalem. So in their going, they would be going through Gentile areas, Gentile countries, and they wanted to make sure that they were purified by going through their ritual baths and by offering a blood sacrifice to God to purify them, to make sure that they were holy so when the day of the Passover came, so they could eat the Passover. So they go up just a little bit early, 2 or 3 days early, to make sure that they get all of this done. 56. All these people are now in Jerusalem, milling around, and they sought therefore for Jesus, and spake one with the other as they stood in the temple. What think ye? Now try to picture this. It's just like it would be today if all this controversy had already been there. He's already been down there at the Feast of Dedication. Everybody is talking about him. And so people are saying, what do you think? Here it is, it's coming. That he will not come to the feast. He just disappeared. Do you think he's not going to come to the feast? Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given commandment that if any man knew where he was, he should show it, that they might take him. So before Jesus ever gets into Jerusalem, that's the reason I'm wanting to study this before we get back to Matthew 21 when he goes down into Jerusalem. Before he ever goes down that hill, this council, the Sanhedrin, down in Jerusalem, has already made up their mind, we're going to kill him. We're going to kill him. So they've given orders. If anybody sees him, let us know where he is, because we're going to kill him. So in chapter 12, verse 1, Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus raised from the dead. So he comes back over to Lazarus' house. So they made him a supper there, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at meat with him. So, again, they're real close friends. He goes over to visit his close friends, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, just like we would go over to have dinner with some of our friends. And the interesting thing is what took place here. It said in verse 3, Mary, therefore, that's the Mary, the mother of Lazarus, took a pound of ointment of pure nard, very precious. Now this would be a very precious perfume, and anointed the feet of Jesus. The word anointed means poured over. So she broke the bottle and poured it over the feet of Jesus. Now that within itself would be quite an act. All of you ladies who have your real good, expensive perfume, do you generally pour it over the feet of your husband? That's not the part of the body that you would be wanting to put it on, but she poured it over his feet, the most lowly part of him. She's taken her most precious thing, pouring it over the most lowly part of his body, and wiped his feet with her hair. You suppose she had a towel in the house? Of course she did. But she's trying to show her adoration for him, how much she loves him, how much she appreciates him. So she takes her hair and wipes his feet, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Now, Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples that should betray him, saith, Why was not this ointment sold for 300 shillings and given to the poor? Now this he said, not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and having the bag, took away what was put therein. So, Judas Iscariot had been a thief all the time. He had been stealing out of the treasury of Jesus, where he put the money to take care of these men. And so he acts really upset. Why wasn't this sold for 300 shillings and so we could have it to give to the poor? But he wasn't interested in the poor. So if you, next time you see some of these political shenanigans that you see, and have you ever seen a politician that wasn't interested in the poor? That's what they think about day and night, 24 hours a day, isn't it? Go turn on your TV, listen to any speech you want to give, and it's what we can do for that, you see. But on the other hand, when you get to looking at what they do, then it doesn't coincide. You see that is in there. So here it is. Judas Iscariot was this kind of guy. Now, I looked up here what this would be, this 300 shillings, and that would be worth about $315 in our money today. So I'm sure Betty has a bottle of perfume worth $350 or $315, but if I found out my wife did, there would be a marriage problem there. So we've got a very expensive bottle of perfume in here. Now, by the way, before we go any farther, when Jesus chose his 12 apostles, do you think he knew what he was doing when he picked out these men? He picked out this real rugged, rough guy, impetuous, always having to talk, always having to be in the forefront. What was his name? Peter. He picked him out. Is he going to use Peter for a good work? Yep. He's going to have him to do something that's going to really take nerve to do. And he picked out a man that is dishonest, who will betray him. He's just as dishonest as he can be. The Lord knows about his heart, but he picked him out, and he's the guy then that will end up betraying Jesus. So Jesus picked out the men that would serve his purpose all the way through. Now verse 7. Jesus' answer was, suffer her or permit her to keep it against the day of my burial. For the poor you have always with you, but me you have not always. So Jesus said, don't give her any trouble, leave her alone, permit her to do this, because she's doing this against the day of my burial. And that is for the day of my burial. Now, what would be the normal procedure that you would plan on doing for somebody that you loved and they were getting ready to die? What would be the normal procedure of when you would prepare them for burial? I can just imagine if I get really sick and some of these days Helen comes in with a bottle of perfume and says, I want to prepare you for your burial, and something. It's a little out of order that is in here. See, no, that's not the way you do it. In there, you wait until you die. Now, why didn't Jesus say, Mary, these guys are right. You should have waited until I die, and then you do this? We all know the story, don't we? Would she have had a chance? He's going to be snatched up. He's going to be crucified. He's going to be taken out and buried. And Mary would not have a chance to do it. So she knows that he's getting ready to die. And so to show her appreciation, how much she loves him before he dies, this is what she does to him while he's still alive. And so he said, you have the poor always with you, and you can help them at all times. Now in verse 9. The common people, therefore, of the Jews learned that he was there. And they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. Now, I want you to stop. Suppose you were a neighbor of Lazarus, and you lived down the street somewhere, and you heard that Jesus and Lazarus was over there in the house. would you be interested in going and seeing them? Would you be interested in seeing Jesus that has caused all of this uproar? And would you be interested in seeing Lazarus who has been raised from the dead? Would you like to talk to somebody who's been raised from the dead? Would you like to have about 5 minutes with them to be able to ask them some questions? This is just normal things. And so these people went over, and it says they went over more to see Lazarus than they did Jesus in this whole thing. So it says, 10, but the chief priest took counsel that they might put Lazarus also to death, because by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. So there would be many of them. They knew Lazarus. He was a neighbor. They knew he's dead. They would help bury him. It would be a community affair. And they go over, and there he's sitting, and he's talking with Jesus. They've heard about this. Several of them were there at the grave. Several of them were not at the grave. They were out working the day Jesus raised him from the dead. But the neighbors now start congregating around. They hear that both of them are in there, and so they start congregating around to see him. And they come up, and they see him. Sure enough, there is Lazarus. And so when they saw the end result of that, then they believed in Jesus. And by the way, what's the purpose of miracles? How many times have we gone through this over and over and over and over again, see? And so they saw it, and so they were there. So they believed on him. Now then, in verse 12, now we're getting ready to go down that hill. We're getting ready to go up there from the top, down the hill. There, see here, let me get over here if this is the, yeah, there's there. Now I want you to picture, Jesus is up at the top of that hill. He's going to be coming right down that hill. He's going to be coming, there's 2 or 3 roads that come down that hill. He's going to be coming down that hill and in a gate that is right below our feet, that's right there. So this is the terrain of where he's coming down. If you look at this terrain, how far do you think it is from where we are right here to the top of that hill? What would it be? Well, it's kind of hard to guess with a picture in it, see, that is in there. But what did I do? Cheat? Oh, well, I can see it. Okay, this is a beautiful, beautiful hill right here, and it's all green. It has oval like this, and I'd say that it's about a little over a half a mile, okay, that is up there. I forgot all about that. Okay, so now the only reason I put this, wanted to show you this, and I forgot about that, was to let you know this hill goes up, and it would be kind of like from here up to Vernon and Velma Winston's house. The hill goes up that high. Now, if there were 200 or 300 people up there, could we hear them down here if they were all yelling and screaming? Well, sure we could. See, especially if they were up on a hill and we were down here. It's not that far. It's just right up the road here. And there. So this is really what happens. Now, on the morrow, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took the branches of the palm tree and went forth to meet him. Dan, turn that thing on again. I want to put that up there so it kind of give us an idea. They go up there at that top of the hill, and they then put out these palm trees, and the other says they put out their clothing that's there. And they went forward to meet him and cried out, Hosanna! Now, Hosanna is a term that means save us, but the scholars tell us by this time it had become a term of gratulation. It had become a term of a complimentary term, of where you held somebody in high esteem. And so that's what they were doing to him then in there. Now then, they're going to be lined up, coming down that hill then. It looks a whole lot taller on that screen than it does in real life. I'll tell you that. That's deceptive when you look at it up there. It's not that tall. Really, Ryan could run all the way to the top of it without stopping and taking a breath. There. Okay, now they're coming down. So he took branches of the palm tree and went and met him. And he said, "Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel." Now this is kind of interesting, because now what are these people calling him? The King of Israel. See? The King of Israel. You remember when Jesus started out back there preaching, what was his first sermons? And John the Baptist, what was it? Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's the message. He then lived to show that he is the king. And now then, all of these people are proclaiming him to be the king. And Jesus, having found a young ass set thereon, as it is written, "Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold the king cometh, sitting on an ass's colt." Now, they went up, and I think I'm going to wait for a little while to tell you about this, but Jesus had them to go over and get a mother and a colt of a donkey, a little donkey and its mother, and bring them over to him. And then he got on the colt of this donkey, and he's riding it down the hill. Now, he's proclaimed as a king, yet he has chosen to enter into Jerusalem on the most humble of all animals, which was the donkey. It was what was the common man used. Very few people had horses. Kings would have horses. But common people would have donkeys. And so he then rode in, not just on a donkey, but on a colt of a donkey that had never been ridden before. And there's a reason for that, and we'll see. Now these things understood not his disciples. His disciples did not understand what was taking place. They didn't put two and two together. They understood not his disciples at the first, but when Jesus was glorified. Now when would that be? When he was raised from the dead. After Jesus was raised from the dead, then remembered they that these things were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. That's kind of interesting. Because as you and I read this, we know that he's coming in down here writing as a result of a prophecy in Zechariah. Zechariah said he would do this, and so he's fulfilling this prophecy. But the disciples, they didn't put two and two together. They weren't able to go back and pull that scripture out and put two and two together of what he's actually doing. And it wasn't until after he had raised from the dead and they were thinking about what he's doing that it hit him. That's the reason that they did these things. See? So, but they didn't know it at that time. Now, 17. The multitude, therefore, that was with him, when he called Lazarus out of the tomb, raised him from the dead, bear witness. So all these people that saw Lazarus, they're telling other people. They're bearing witness. We saw him raise Lazarus from the dead. He raised Lazarus from the dead. For this cause also the multitude went and met him, and for that they heard that he had done this sign. The Pharisees therefore said among themselves, Behold, how ye prevail nothing. Lo, the world is going after him. So he's coming down into Jerusalem. He's followed by a great crowd. Now next week we're going to study Matthew, Mark, and Luke about this crowd. And they give us a lot of details that John doesn't give us. So they're coming down with this crowd, and there's so many people that they have the road lined with their coats and palm branches. All of them are yelling and screaming. And the people who have seen Lazarus, saw him raised from the dead, they're telling people, he raised Lazarus from the dead, we saw him, and so all this testimony is going on. Now, what would be your guess that's going on down with that council, the Sanhedrin, when they hear all of this? And they do hear it, see? They can hear it. What's going to happen to them? There's going to be a fear that's going to be struck in them, and they're going to try to determine, what can we do? What can we do to get this group of people shut up? Because if we don't get them shut up and get rid of him, we're going to be exposed for what we are. So these Jews are having a pretty rough time. Now Jesus comes down, and I want to go ahead and read now in verse 20 here tonight for our class tonight. Next week we're going back to Matthew 21, and we're going to reread now. Remember, him coming down, why he chose the donkey, what was said, what did the people do, what did the Sanhedrin do, what did they demand of him. So it'll show us a whole lot of things that John hadn't told us. But he comes down. Now when he gets in there, there were certain Greeks among those that went up to Jerusalem at the feast. Why would there be Greeks up there? What? Proselytes. Right. These would be Greeks who have converted to Judaism, and so they've come down. So they were down there. These therefore came to Philip, who was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him. Now Bethsaida of Galilee was a little city right up there where Jesus lived, right next to Capernaum there, and asked him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. So the Gentiles come to him and said, We'd like to see Jesus. So they asked him. Philip cometh and telleth Andrew. Andrew cometh and Philip, and they tell Jesus. Jesus, there's some Greeks out here who would like to talk to you. And Jesus answered them, saying, The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. So he said, My hour now has come. We've coming into town, and this is the event where I will be glorified. That's again, what does the word glorified mean? Held in high opinion. Because to be held in high opinion. What is going to be the one major event that will exalt Jesus Christ more than all the other miracles that he has ever done? It's going to be his resurrection. That will prove beyond any shadow of a doubt he's the Son of God. That's when he is really, truly going to be glorified. He explains it to them. He said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a grain of wheat fall into the earth and die, it abideth by itself alone. But if it die, it beareth much fruit. So he's trying to get them to see, if I don't die, I'll not produce fruit. But it's just like a grain. If it falls to the earth and it dies, then new life comes out of it. He said, He that loveth his life loseth it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. If any man serve me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall also my servant be. If any man serve me, him will my Father honor. This is what he's telling the Greeks. I suppose that the Greeks would, as they're talking to the Jewish Messiah, would probably have something in the back of their mind. Who was it that Jesus was sent to? He was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, wasn't he? Will the Greeks have any benefit in this? When he dies, will they be able to have any benefit along with the others? And so he comes in and he tells them, you will. He said, I'm going to die, and then I'll bring forth this fruit. He said, here's your job. You serve me. Let him follow me. And if you follow me, you'll be where I am and with the Father. Now in verse 27. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Let's read kind of slowly. If somebody knows that they're getting ready to die very, very soon, would their soul be troubled? And especially if they were able to know the kind of death that they were going to have, that it's going to be such a tempestuous death, a horrible, horrible death, the worst that was ever inflicted upon man, the Romans had invented in that crucifixion. And he knows that he has to go through this. And so he's telling them, I'm going to die. And then he says his soul is troubled. Now when Jesus goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane a little later, he will say, I am sorrowful unto death. And that means I'm so sad I could die, knowing what he's going to have to go through. So he said, Father, save me from this hour. But in other words, he said, what shall I say? In other words, shall I say, Father, save me from this hour? But for this cause came I unto this hour. So what can I do? can I pray to God that He will save me from going through this death? Because that's the very reason I came, was to go through this death, was to go through this very hour. And he said, and there came therefore a voice out of heaven, saying, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And he told him, he said, Father, glorify thy name. He said, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. So here comes a voice out of heaven. Now, God spoke one other time out of heaven, didn't He? You remember where that was? Back at the baptism. He spoke out of heaven. Now here He's speaking again, this time in Jerusalem. And the multitude, therefore, that stood by, heard it said, it had thundered. Others said, an angel had spoken to him. Might do us some good to stop and think about that for a minute. What would you think after class tonight? We're all standing around, and a voice comes out of heaven and says, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. It sounded like thunder. It sounded like a voice. It sounded like words, but it was a roll of thunder. It was. What was that? Oh, that was just thunder. You're just imagining that you heard something. No, and the angel's actually spoken to him. So they're talking back and forth. Don't tell me that I just think I heard it. I heard it. I know what he said. Well, you couldn't. Now, I can't even imagine what it's like to hear a voice like thunder. Can you? Where the words are there and it comes out of heaven. It would be shocking. It would just absolutely petrify you. And so these people are wondering, what in the world is going on? Jesus answered and said, this voice hath not come for my sake, but for your sake. Now is the judgment of this world. Now shall the prince of this world be cast out. Jesus will be casting out Satan when he dies on the cross. He'll be taking his power away from him. And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto myself. But this he said, signifying what manner of death he should die. If I be lifted up from the earth, that's crucifixion. The multitude therefore answered, we have heard out of the law that the Christ abideth forever, and how sayest thou, the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? So we've always been told that the Christ would never die. He would abide forever. Jesus therefore said unto them, yet a little while is the light among you. Walk while you have the light, that darkness overtake you not. And he that walketh in the darkness knoweth not whither he goeth. While you have the light, believe on the light, that you may become sons of light. Now these things spake Jesus, and he departed and hid himself from them. But though he had done so many signs before them, yet they believed not on him, that the word of Isaiah the prophet might be fulfilled, which he spoke. And then he quotes Isaiah, where Isaiah said that these people had blinded their hearts, they had closed their eyes, so that they couldn't really see the evidence. Seeing, you shall see and not understand. You'll see a man raised from the dead, and it'll not impact you to understand that only deity could do that. You'll hear a voice out of heaven, and it'll not impact you to know that this must be God talking. You'll hear me, you'll hear others talking, and yet it'll not make an impression upon you. Now I want you to look in verse 41. These things saith Isaiah, because he saw his glory, and he spake of him. Nevertheless, even of the rulers, many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. For they love the glory that is of men more than the glory that is of God. So now, we learn another thing here about these rulers. The rulers are trying to find an occasion to put him to death. And yet, many of these rulers believe on him. And of course, that segment of the Sanhedrin will not be trying to put him to death. It'll be the wicked segment, the majority. But what about these others? What about the others that believed on him? Well, they wouldn't confess it because they knew they'd be kicked out of the synagogue. They knew that they would be what shall we say? ostracized, excommunicated is the word that we would use today in normal parlance, I guess. Kicked out, not a part of, severed from Judaism. You cannot come to the synagogue. You can no longer be a Jew. You can no longer be part of this religion. Out you go. But they loved the glory of men more than they loved the glory of God, so they didn't confess it. So we're beginning to see what gets into these people's minds. Now, Jesus then makes his last speech here, not the last one he'll ever make, but the last one on this occasion before he leaves. And Jesus cried and said, "He that believeth on me, believeth not on me." Can that be true? He that believeth on me, believeth not on me. Can that be true? Okay, he that believeth on me, believeth not on me, but on him that sent me. This is what, in all languages, English, Greek, all others, is called an ellipsis. It's where you leave out words that are obviously understood. So watch what I'm going to put in, and it'll make sense in our mind. Jesus cried and said, "He that believeth on me believeth not only on me, but also on him that sent me." Okay? That's the thing that he's talking about. "And he that beholdeth me, beholdeth him that sent me." If you see me, you see God. Is this going to throw up a barrier to the Jews? See? Do you see how he's throwing this out a little bit here at a time? "I am come a light into the world, that whosoever believeth on me may not abide in darkness. And if any man hear my sayings and keep them not, I judge him not." That means I condemn him not. "For I came not to judge or condemn the world, but to save the world." Judgment day will be another time. I'm not here to condemn you right now. "He that rejecteth me and receiveth not my sayings hath one that shall judge him. The word that I spake, the same shall judge him in the last day." That's when you'll be judged. "For I spake not for myself, but the Father that sent me. He hath given me a commandment of what I say and what I should speak. And I know that his commandment is eternal life. The things thereof which I speak, even as the Father hath said unto me, so I speak." So, I've gone through this so we can kindly see that the gauntlet has been thrown down. We can see that we have Jesus and all of his believers, his followers, who are coming down that hill in our next class, coming down that hill proclaiming him to be the king, proclaiming the kingdom has come, honoring and glorifying him, and he's getting ready to enter into the temple. And down there in the temple are the rulers, the Sanhedrin. Some of them have seen enough evidence that they believe on him, but their heart is so wicked that they'd rather have the glory of men, so they won't confess it. Others hate him so much that they're looking forward somehow or another to put him to death. And the word is put out, let us know where he is. So that is what Jesus is going to be walking into. And I hope it just kind of sets up the climate in Jerusalem so that when we see him going into Jerusalem and all of this chaos begins to break out and all of these ungodly things happen to him, that we'll understand it wasn't something that just happened overnight. It's something that had been building up in them. Okay, class.